a lot of you guys out there, you don't know your history, and therefore you don't know what to expect. Because if you know and understand your history, you know what's coming. Obviously, there's a big difference between Rome and America. And the only difference is technology. They're still facing the same problems then that we are today, how to basically feed enough people so they don't revolt and overthrow the people in the government. That's basically what it all boils down to. But what I basically want to talk about right now is what was going on between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. See, they actually had a Cold War. And basically, what I want to discuss is not the Cold War aspect between the countries themselves, but the Cold War aspect between other states. Basically, let's take the country Egypt, because Egypt's been in the news for a long time. See, if you go back in history, on August 29th, 1956, that was a big, big day in world history. That's when the colonial powers, the French and the British, basically invaded Egypt and tried to retake the Suez Canal. Basically, what happened after that was America didn't go with the old colonial powers, and in December of 1956, the colonial powers left Egypt, they left the Middle East, and that was the end of colonialism and the start of imperialism. And what do I mean by imperialism? Because right after the colonial powers left, people in the Middle East, they had two choices. One, they could side with the U.S., or two, they could side with Russia. But they had to make a decision, because if they did not side with either side, guess what? Both were gunning for him, because both of them were trying to replace him. Let me give you an example. After America basically expelled the French and the British from Egypt in 1956, the Americans were treated as heroes. But within a few years, the relationship soured, because at that time, Egyptian President Nasser didn't like the fact that he considered Israel an American client state, basically supported by American taxpayer dollars. And he didn't like that. So he basically decided that he was going to throw the U.S. out and start getting all cozy with Khrushchev in Russia. But see, Nasser himself was a socialist, but he was not a car left coding communist. He was not a communist. He was a socialist. Now, obviously, a lot of people can say socialism leads to communism, and I would agree. But see, there's certain people who believe socialism can last the way it is, and obviously they're lacking the historic, basic, and historic economic criteria to understand that's basically a whole bunch of BS. See, every socialist who's out there in life basically believes, well, yeah, socialism failed, but I never did it. Like Obama, he's like, socialism failed, but hell, I never tried it, so I'm going to do it right. It's all narcissism. But getting back to my original story, Nasser back in the late 50s was pulling more to the Soviet sphere of influence. And basically what happened was the Soviets started giving them weapons at discounted rates. The Soviets started giving them tanks. The Soviets started giving them intelligence. And at that time, Egypt was basically a client state of the Soviet Union. But see, the counterweight that in the 1950s and 1960s, the U.S. owned Iran. Now Iran is our enemy, our number one enemy in the Middle East. Now every day we're talking about the Iran nuclear program. But see, back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, until the Iranians threw out the Shah, Iran was our puppet state. And everything we wanted from Iran, we got from Iran. I mean, yeah, we had to throw out Mossadegh in 1953 to boost up the Shah, but we did that because Iran was a client state. But see, throughout time, everything changes. Because if you look at everything that's going on in the Middle East in 2011, now Iran is a client state of Russia and China, and America is basically supporting Egypt. So you see basically what's going on in the Middle East and what's been going on for the past 100 years, if you want to go all back to colonialism when the French and the British were playing off each other, was they basically want to control the oil. The powers that be want to control the oil. The big powers. And if you look at the big picture, what's going on in the Middle East today and what was going on in the Middle East before, it really hasn't changed. I mean, the two main players in the game have somewhat mutated and became something different, because back in the day, America would fight communism wherever it was. Back in the day, America would support a dictator like General Pinochet in Chile. Ironically enough, General Pinochet killed his own people on 9/11, 1973 to overthrow a democratically elected Marxist. But that's when, back in the day when the U.S. actually did everything it could to support capitalism. Right now, that isn't the case anymore, and a lot of people forgot about that. Back in the day, the Russians did everything they could to destabilize democracies that were capitalistic, and they did everything they could to support communists. Like, for instance, a lot of people don't know this, but the communist government in Afghanistan in 1979 asked the Russians to come in. They begged the Russians to come in. And the Russians decided that they had to come in to prevent Afghanistan from falling into capitalist hands, aka the U.S. Because if the U.S. got Afghanistan back in the day, that means they would have a border state right by the Soviet Union. It's all a chess game in the Middle East. Right now, if you look at the Middle East playground, and what I mean a playground, that's exactly what it is. Let's look at the little company of Lebanon. Lebanon right now, the government of Lebanon is in control of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a proxy organization that was created after the Israelis pulled out in 1980 out of Lebanon. Hezbollah receives their funding from Iran and Syria. Hezbollah receives their military funding from Iran and Syria. Everyone knows this. And Iran itself is a proxy state of China and Russia. So again, it doesn't matter if you're in the 1900s or in the 2000s. It's all the same. The superpowers are always using the Middle East as a chess match. And it's not just what's going on in Lebanon. Look at Egypt, Libya, Bahrain. I mean, I've already written through all the numerology. The fact that this is all happening in 2011, believe me, folks, it's not a coincidence. The 11th year in the new decade, and all hell is breaking loose. And it's not just in Egypt. It's not just in the Middle East. It's in the United States of America. You guys have heard of what's going on in Wisconsin and Columbus. But here's something you haven't heard. What is going on in Asia? Vietnam and countries around Vietnam are experiencing inflation at a 12% rate. Do you know what happens when you experience inflation at such a high rate? Food prices start getting very high. And the poor people who can't afford food as it is right now seriously will not be able to afford the food later. So you know what people do when they don't have food? They riot. So that's where you can expect more riots. In Asia right now, because they're running out of food, because their currency is becoming spit. And this all goes back to those damn Wall Street bankers that basically rob everyone, not just in America, but in the world, of their pensions, of their bank accounts, and of their pride. When the bailouts happened under the Bush and Obama administrations in 2008 and 2009. This is still going all back to what those people at Goldman Sachs, Fannie Mae, and all those other corporate communists. The fact of the matter is no one wants to do anything about it. And I'm getting sick and tired of showing example after example of how these people basically press people to the point where they force them to revolt. I talked about this yesterday. I talked about it last week. If you want to start a revolt, you cut the food price. Now, I mean, you don't cut the food price. You cut the food products. You pay farmers not to grow food. Ever hear of that one? It happens all the time. It happens in the United States of America. The government pays the farmers not to grow food so they can keep food at a certain level. Food prices, that is, at a certain level. This is not a new tactic. People have been doing this since Roman time. The problem is people right now are so dumbed down, they understand what is going on. And I honestly got to tell you, I'm highly disappointed with the people of the world right now. Because, I've been running my mouth. In the few minutes I have left here, I'll tell you what I've been doing for the past 5-6 years. In 2005, I knew an economic storm was coming to the world. So in 2006, I decided, you know what? I'm going to go to all the mayors in Cleveland and around the surrounding suburbs, and I'm going to tell them the dollar's going to default, and I'm going to tell them all of this stuff's going to happen, and I'm going to try to make some change. Every single one of those people, every single one of those mayors laughed me out their office. Recession, depression in the United States. This is 2006. No way, that can't happen. People are flipping houses in a month and getting 5, 10 grand. What are you, nuts? That's basically what I heard. Hell, I went to Mayor Jackson's office here in Cleveland, and hell, they almost had to put handcuffs on me. They almost did. Told me to get out. I told them what I was there for. They basically said leave the office. But hell, that was my plan in 2006. In 2007, my plan was this. I'm going to go to every single sports franchise here in Cleveland. And I'm going to use numerology. And I'm going to help put them over the top. And I'm going to help the city of Cleveland win the championship. And then, after I do that, people are going to be like, how'd you do it? And I'm going to tell them numerology. And I'm going to get people to believe in it that way. Well, things didn't quite work out that way. See, the Cleveland Browns, a guy by the name of Phil Savage, who was running the team back then, a guy who I basically begged through emails only for him to draft Adrian Peterson, you know, that bum for the Minnesota Vikings. Adrian Peterson, who was born 3/21/1985, adds up to 29, 2 plus 9 equals 11. That bum who plays for the Minnesota Vikings, I mean, he couldn't have done. He couldn't have helped the Cleveland Browns. No. Hell no. I mean, Braylon Edwards was a much better pickup. Joe Thomas was a much better pickup than Adrian Peterson would have been. But basically what I told Mr. Savage afterwards was listen to me or get fired. Well, he didn't listen to me, and yeah, the latter happened. But then I moved on to the Cavs. And for people who don't believe what I'm about to say, you can please Google Gary the Numbers Guy /MySpace. Go on my section, on my blog section on there, where it says, as a matter of fact, Anthony, can you put this on a computer? Go to Gary the Numbers Guy /MySpace, and there's going to be a blog section up there, and it says Dan Gilbert, owner of the Cavs. Put that on in the chat room because I want people to see. Basically, in 2007, other than the Browns and the Indians, which I'll get around to in a second to tell that story, I basically went to the Cavs through Danny Ferry's people first, and they basically said, okay, if you think numerology works, show us how it works. So I basically said, you can't find it? All right, never mind. They basically said, prove to us numerology can work. Well, I'm like, okay. I got 3 people here who were going to get injured within before the playoffs start in 2007. So the first guy was Joe Johnson. He got beat up for a few weeks. Yeah, came back. Next one was Jason Kidd. He got beat up for a few weeks, came back right before the All-Star break, if I recall. And the last one was the one I said was going to be the most serious. I said a student superstar for then the Washington Wizards, Gilbert Arenas, would get injured. So Dan Gilbert got back to me himself from his private email, and he basically said this. If Gilbert Arenas gets hurt like you say he does, and then he's put in parentheses, I hope that that doesn't happen because I don't wish injury on anyone. He said, I'm going to start talking to you. Well, I believe on 4/4/2007, Gilbert Arenas busted his freaking knee. And I have yet to hear from Dan Gilbert since. So that didn't quite. You found it? Okay, so everyone can go up there, and if you want the original email, you can Google me. Email me at GaryTheNumbersGuy@ymail.com. I'll send you the original email minus Dan Gilbert's email address himself, because I'm not going to put him on blast like that. But after that didn't work out, I figured, hell, let's try the Indians. And the Indians, out of all the organizations out there, the Indians were the one who basically gave me, the most respect. I met with people in the Indians, and I'm going to tell them the same thing back then, and I'm going to tell you right now. I said, you don't need my help to make the playoffs, but you're going to need my help to win the World Series. And if you recall, they were up 3-1 in the Boston Red Sox, but then that Cleveland or Great Lakes curse came, and somehow they lost 3-1 to Boston. I still don't understand how that happened, but it is what it is. So my plan failed again. But then again, the way I always look at life, it's like this. Life's not the destination, it's the journey. That's honestly the way I feel. And I learned a lot. I learned the fact that, Derek Anderson, born in 1983, Braylon Edwards, born in 1983, Fausto Carmona, born in 1983, all had career years in 2007. And then when you figure out why that is, well, people who are born in 1983 are born in the year of the pig. 2007 just happened to be the year of the pig. Makes sense, huh? Whenever you think about this stuff, it starts making sense. Anyways, it's been fun doing this. Next week I come in at 11, 12 o'clock. Hope you guys will join me. As always,